Good night. It's wonderful to see so many people here. I think we are almost 1,000 people in, or 800, 900 people. It's a great pleasure to have you all here and to welcome you as one of your hosts tonight. My name is Coco von Stuckrad. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at this university, and I'm one of the hosts tonight, together with the Studium Generale. And the reason why there are two hosts is also there are two reasons why we have this meeting, this very special event with Bruno Latour tonight. The one reason is, of course, everyone from Groningen and now also the guests know already that the University of Groningen has its 400th anniversary. And the Studium Generale and also the university in general had this idea to create a program of 400 questions for 400 years. So a lot of questions were related to religion and knowledge, religion, science, university, academy, secular understanding, and so on. And that is one reason why the Studium Generale said, well, this is very interesting to have someone who is an expert on this. The other reason why we are here, and this is, I think, 400 people here are delegates of a conference that is also held at the university since yesterday, and that is the official contribution of my faculty to the anniversary year. But it's also, more importantly maybe, the annual meeting of the European Association for the Study of Religions that is held here in Groningen this year, and it is devoted, and these 400 delegates discuss the topic religion and pluralities of knowledge. So this links up very nicely to the history of the university, of course, and we thought so, and therefore we organized this together. But I don't want to introduce the speaker of tonight. I am only the host, and maybe if we have time in the end to have some questions from the audience, I will organize that as well. But I'd like to invite a good colleague of mine to introduce the speaker of tonight, and that is Professor Ann Taves, Professor of Religion from at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And she will introduce our keynote speaker of tonight. Anne.
Thank you, Koku. Thank you, Koku. And it's really an honor and a privilege to be asked to do this, and maybe a little bit intimidating. Professor Bruno Latour is an intellectual who is so well known that it's easy to use the cliche that he needs no introduction. But if you're like me, you may be coming to this lecture knowing some of the work for which he's most famous. His work in the area of science studies, for example, or actor network theory. And at the same time, perhaps a little puzzled that he is speaking, as we learn from the subtitle of his talk, on the forms of knowledge proper to religious beings. So I'll go over some of the basics and then add a few details that can help us see where his talk fits into his larger research agenda. Bruno Latour is currently professor at Sciences Po Paris, where until recently, until a couple of years ago, he was the vice president for research. And prior to that, for over 20 years, he was professor at the Centre de Sociologie de l'Innovation at the École Nationale Supérieure des Mines in Paris, which is an institute of technology, somewhat like MIT or Caltech, and a visiting professor at UC San Diego, the London School of Economics, and Harvard University. He's received numerous awards and all that kind of stuff, but I want to focus in here on the intellectual issues that are going to inform this talk. He was trained first as a philosopher and then as a social anthropologist. He did ethnographic fieldwork for a short while in Africa, but then turned his ethnographic lens on us modern people, starting with scientists at the Salk Institute in San Diego. This resulted in his first book, Laboratory Life, which was published in 1986, and 2 years later, Science in Action, and resulted also in many collaborations in the area of science policy and research management. With We Have Never Been Modern, which was published in 1993, he offered a major philosophical critique of what we moderns think it means to be modern. Among scholars of religion, I think, though, he may be also very well known for his actor network theory, which is a methodological approach that he summarized in Reassembling the Social, which was published in 2005. At the same time, though, he has published 3 books that take up key issues in the study of religion. Iconoclash, which was published in 2002, takes up the image or icon in science, religion, and art. On the Modern Cult of the Factish Gods, which was published in 2010, that book uses the concept of the fetish to argue that facts are inseparable from fabrication. And then most recently, in 2013, in a book called Rejoicing, he takes up the torments of religious speech. That's the subtitle. This last book, though, emerges out of a massive project that he's been directing since he took the position at Sciences Po. The project is called An Inquiry into the Modes of Existence. And this new project continues his ethnographic study of us moderns, but in contrast to his earlier work, which focused primarily on critique, this project asks more positively, if we have never been modern, then what have we been? In developing an answer, he makes use of actor network theory, but he finds that it has a serious limitation. It does not allow us to detect and ask questions about values, and most specifically, to understand what we moderns value and how those values can be endorsed while respecting differences and being wary of the tendency of some values to crush others. The project focuses on points where values, or modes, as in modes of existence, clash in order to highlight contrasts and identify what is most important to people and how best to talk about it. It's a highly collaborative project, and I've been exploring his very elaborate website in preparation for this, and I encourage you to look into it yourselves. This is a project that we're actually all encouraged to participate in. So to conclude, I'll add that while the Modes of Existence project is an anthropological investigation of us modern people, it also represents a sort of coming out process for Professor Latour as a philosopher, and a more deliberate embrace of his philosophical training. One of the things that I learned from him last night at dinner is that when he studied philosophy, he did so under Professor André Mallet, who was the translator of Rudolf Bultmann's writings into French. And Latour wrote his doctoral dissertation on the hermeneutical issues associated with biblical exegesis. So it turns out that for Latour, the study and also the practice of religion has been present all along. It's just coming out more, so to speak, in the present. So in the Modes of Existence project, and this is a quote from the website, the invisible entities with which informants, meaning us moderns, build their world are taken very seriously. But as with other aspects of being modern, Professor Latour wants to expand our options for understanding them beyond visible and invisible, real and imagined knowledge or belief. So with that, I think we've arrived at tonight's topic, Beyond Belief, on the forms of knowledge proper to religious beings. Please join me in welcoming Professor Latour.
Thank you, Ron. Next time I will be on the top there. As Jan Hassmann has suggested in his recent book on religion and violence, how much we regret the time when religion was the opium of the people. Now, he says, it's rather the dynamite of the people. From a drug, putting the damned of the world into somnolence instead of doing revolution, religion has become the spur of revolutionary changes, and not always for the better. As the learned society, which is here in part, knows very well, religious studies have become an entry into the most misunderstood source of extreme violence and radical politics. And this is not true only of Islam, but it's everywhere visible, from India to the evangelical churches of North America, all the way to Russian Orthodoxy, without forgetting the violent act of destruction of idols and fetishes that keep accompanying so much of the missionary work. While the state of the planet leaves everybody cold, the destruction of someone's cult brings vast masses into action immediately. While modernism had long been defined by secularization, it seems that we are witnessing rather a reinforcement of modernist violence through new type of what should be called religious wars. But far from being a remnant of the past or an archaic return to the past, this metamorphosis of opium into dynamite proves that religion has to be taken as a fully modernist attitude. The learned society, which is in our midst here, is ideally capable of probing this old novelty. And if there is one place where all the tension of religion with modernity is being open to inquiry, it's of course here in Holland, with its long history of simultaneously pluralism and most recently the hard testing of the extreme fragility of tolerance. So, what I want to do tonight is study what biochemists would call potentialization of a drug. It was a drug that put people to sleep, opium, and now it makes them very active. It has been potentialized. We have to discover what in French is called the principe d'action, the action principle of this drug, that explain this potentialization. And I'll do it in 3 parts, trying to find out why is it that this drug has become so strange. One about social explanation, very quickly. The other one about belief. And the third one about politics. And I would show the 3 one actually combined together might explain some of the difficulty we have with this modernist religious wars. So let me start with the first one. We are not much helped in this search by the sociological principle most clearly articulated, to take a classic by Emil Durkheim, that religion is made of a rites and words put in place to hide and reveal the existence of what he called society. Durkheim, as everybody knows, has initiated this long set of studies that try to replace the enigmatic nature of religion by an even more enigmatic set of entity called society or social relation. You remember, I am sure, how Durkheim claimed that the impersonal force of society was the only reality behind the vast elaboration of all religion. But I'm sure you also remember how strange personal action, how active, enigmatic was the so-called impersonal force. One example, and I quote, society, Durkheim say, could not abandon the categories to the free choice of individual. For this reason, society uses all its authority upon its member to forestall such dissidences. It's frequently rude to individuals. It's constantly doing violence to our natural appetite, and so on and so forth. Here is an impersonal, highly personal agent parading as an impersonal agent in the hands of a sociology, whereas the sociologist himself is claiming that he is unveiling the true nature of religion. It's hard not to see in so much study, social explanation of religion, that society, which is supposed to be behind, is indistinguishable from the one God, one people of the barely secularized Yahweh. And in the case of Durkheim, it's even more strange because it's also part of being the French Republic. So you have Yahweh and the French Republic combined together. Only the French can do that. So secularization has always been an attempt at reinforcing the one God, one society argument of all. The obsession of sociology for explaining the obscure by appealing to the more obscure is based on the denegation that there is something that makes people act, something whose agency has to be carefully scrutinized in its own term, and for which the umbrella term of religion is terribly inadequate, as we all know, and which is not society. It's not society that is behind religion. On the contrary, in part, society is made by religious meeting with these beings. So this reversal in the direction of explanation is essential if we want to understand and avoid the one people, one God argument. Society is what is to be explained, not what brings any explanation, especially not when by a society scholars of a Durkheimian bent means in effect the God of Israel and Christianity, and the French Republic in addition. So let me come to my second point. Here we come to the second problem that renders the potentialization of opium into dynamite difficult to follow. This time, it's not due to the explanation that appealed to society, instead of explaining through religion part of the social ties, but it's due, and often of the part of those who call themselves religious, to the fact that they find what makes them act, what they encounter in competition with science, or at least with information, or more exactly what I call double click. I will explain why double click is my enemy. This is what I call the invention of obscurantism in matters of religion. Or another expression would be the invention of the occult. The very use of the word religion has come to mean what is not explainable, rational, what requires an appeal to an extraordinary set of drives for the analyst, or, and I'll show that this is worse, that requires supranatural forces for those who are called believers. No, those who believe, they have to be made believers. That's my point. So belief should remain in quotation mark. And of course in a church. I claim that there is nothing obvious in this link of religion with the strange, the occult, the supernatural, or to use the main notion that blocks any understanding of a question with belief. The idea of belief is the result, and the unhappy result, of interrogating a mode of existence by using another mode. I want to try to propose that belief is always the result of an accusation into an interlocutory relation. So the use of belief proves that there is a conflict during an interchange in the template we should use to define an entity in its own term. Not rationally, it would be too much, but reasonably. And I'll show that to be reasonable in those matters is more important than being rational. This uncertainty on the template we use is banal. And I'll take a completely different example to make you understand the point. If, after a judge has rendered her or his verdict, you, the plaintiff, keep saying, I don't feel appeased by this judgment, your lawyer will be right to say, psychological peace of mind is not what law is about. A verdict has its own logic. And nobody hearing this would conclude that law is irrational, occult, or obscure. They might complain against the formalism, but they wouldn't say it's irrational. Law resists the accusation of being about belief. We should be able to say the same thing when registered any crossing between two incompatible templates. Interrogated as carriers of psychological appeasement, legal vectors are found wanting. Well, the same thing could happen, for instance, and should happen, when you ask the career of religious salvation, Bible, an angel, an image, whether they produce also information about some state of affair. The answer is most often a pitiful no. No. Imagine the Virgin Mary asking Gabriel, what information is she carrying? Is he carrying? He would say, I'm not carrying information. I'm transforming you. Information content, 0. Transformation content, maximum. God. So the problem is that they say no, or rather, they don't answer anything, and they hide what they had to say. This is the origin of occultism. I don't know if you remember, but Piero della Francesca painted an Annunciation, and he did it very beautifully, so that the angel is actually hidden by the pillar. So the Virgin Mary is here, the pillar is in the middle, and the Gabriel is here. So Piero della Francesca made very carefully so that it was absolutely clear that the Virgin could not see Gabriel. So Gabriel was not a website. Gabriel was not a transfer of information. It was completely different. And to make sure the difference is understood, the invisibility is actually shown thanks to the use of perspective, as Louis Marin has shown. So the notion of occult, of the irrational, is the result of an embarrassment. Yes, Gabriel would be embarrassed at being asked the wrong question, at being interrogated in the wrong key. Embarrassment which is thus interpreted as belief into something odd by the interrogator, to which those who have been accused of believing, and that's where the thing becomes really dramatic, have only two exit routes. One is to withdraw into a rather shameful yes. I believe in strange things, but I won't tell anybody. And the other is, on the contrary, to assert that yes, indeed, there is a world that their belief access just as much as information access the world of common sense, except it's a word of beyond. At this point, belief that started as a misunderstanding on the part of the interrogator is accepted by the interrogated as what he or she has to hold in order to be respected, which the lawyer will never do. The judge will never say, I accept and I abandon my definition of law because I cannot carry psychological smooth quality in my judgment. And that's where the thing becomes really terrible. So people who have been in this interlocutory situation would say, yes, I believe in what cannot be explained by normal means. So what started as a stupidity on the part of the interrogator, not using the good template, becomes now what the wrongly understood interrogated begins to hold most dearly at. And that's at the heart of our question. Because now there is a deep lack of authenticity in accepting to be a believer yourself because of the way you have been requested to bear witness for those, the beings who make him or make you act. So the potentialization of opium into dynamite comes, in my view, from this operation by which the imputation of belief by the outside observer has been interiorized by the agent as the only way to understand what he or her act. Yes, you're right. After all, I believe in occult, irrational, supernatural sort of things. Except, this cannot be true. This cannot be true. I mean, belief cannot be the sincere, the authentic way in which you are acted by the being activating you. Belief is always a mistake, whether it's imputed from the outside or accepted as inside, as the only definition of a situation. And since it is what I call a category mistake, it deprives the now entrenched believer of any possibility of re-articulating what makes him or her act. So now the believer is poisoned from the inside by this imputation of believing into something strange that does not correspond at all on how he or she is acted upon by the beings coming to make him or her saved. I claim that this is the source of a modernist form of fundamentalism, a fully modern extension, fully modern, of a poisonous notion of belief, coming at first from the outside as a category mistake on what it is to be acted upon, and then interiorized as the only positive way to assert oneself in face of a confrontation by people who don't understand what you are. And the conflagration, the violence ensues immediately, since believers, I mean, people who are now made to believe, they have to believe. Believe is something in which we don't have to believe. This is another definition of agnosticism. Agnosticism means that you don't use belief to understand all these things. They are deprived of any reasonable way of following their own beings. So when they encounter other believers who are just as deprived of their resource, what happens is necessary violence. There is no other way. Not an old, pre-modern, archaic violence. And Assmann's book is really interesting about that. He classifies the different sorts of religious violence. No, a fully modernist violence whose, as we see every day in the press, intensity increased with the violence of the others. And the slow disappearance of any alternative template to define action by other beings means that there is no other way. This is the contemporary situation. Former religious souls, now convinced that what they have to die for or to kill for is made in the name of their beliefs. So there is a built-in inauthenticity in believing in belief, which means that the meeting with religious beings can no longer be articulated. That's my point. Let me pause for a moment here. I'm not saying that fight among believers is a remnant of the past or a new relapse in archaism. No, I'm saying that it is the incorporation into a vast array of modes of existence of one template, belief, itself due to the competition of another template, information or communication or double-click, often misunderstood with science, but this is not our topic today. So ask, what information do you carry? Bearers of religious salvation have to say, none. None. To which the interrogator replies, then you are not part of our common world. To which the couriers may reply, okay, we are out. Can you leave us a small place? That's the opium phase. But they also may reply, we will fight to the death for our belief. And that's the dynamite phase. Opium has become dynamite for the same reason. Notice that there is nothing in the original scene that should have connected religion with strange or irrational or even with belief. Remember the lawyer and the judge I mentioned before. It's perfectly possible for the judge accused of not being sensitive to the peace of mind, faire son deuil, we say in French, I don't know the expression in English, faire son deuil. The judge give me a verdict, but I'm not satisfied. But it's not what law is supposed to do. So it's perfectly possible for the judge accused of not being sensitive to the peace of mind of the plaintiff to explain why law has its logic that gives a quality to the common world that would have been lost. It would have been lost if he had accepted to transform law into a psychological, smooth solution. So they disagree. But they now reasonably disagree because they accept to use two templates. And because the plaintiff has no way to accuse the judge of believing in law. Make the test. No one would say to a judge, do you believe in law? The judge or the lawyer say, yes, of course, I mean, it's completely immaterial. Why would you ask me about belief? I'm a lawyer. I pursue this specific type of beings. I meet them. So law resists the interiorization of the accusation of belief. And that's the key point which is of interest. Why don't we do the same thing for what is called the meeting with the carriers of salvation? Let me take another example. Suppose your lover asks you, classical question, do you love me? And you answer, I've already told you hundreds of times. Yes, I love you. And then, would not be the first lover be legitimate in asking, thus, you don't love me anymore? And if you push the button of a tape recorder and say, here, is this not a proof? Listen, this is what I have said last year. Pook. Don't you believe now that I love you? Every one of you here will understand that the lover is right in throwing the tape recorder at the face of a man. Why do I think it's a man? The man of a woman, of a man, so stupid to believe in making the original question, do you love me, a matter of information. Double click. Obviously, if you don't hear the question as a matter of transformation, no amount of proofs will ever convince the interrogator. The difference with religion in this case is that the lover, the first lover, he or she, because he or she loves, has a robust resistance to any interpretation of the interchange as being about belief in information. So by resisting belief, he or she keeps open the possibility of converting his or her lover to a reasonable, not a rational, change of repertoire. So imagine the scene a few days later. How could you be so dumb, so insensitive to push the button of your tape recorder? To which he or she could answer, probably in tears, yes, I was so stupid. A different outcome was possible because the authenticity of a shift from information to transformation was actually not extracted out of the core by the notion of information and thus belief. So a different outcome than violence is possible. In this case, because values may be re-articulated from the inside. This is what is completely impossible when the extraneous template of belief has been made to be only the definition of how we stick to one's values. Because if we have only one template, it's impossible to re-articulate. And the guy will keep saying, I was transmitting information. Is this not what you asked? You asked me if I love you. I said, yes, I said you love me. No, You understood nothing. It's another mode of existence. It's another tone. Everything is different. You're completely misunderstood. But if you have only one template, you cannot even hear the accusation of misunderstanding. So, and here I'm getting my third part. If you have followed me, the question now becomes, how come that the meeting with careers of religious salvation are not met with the same resistance and robust opposition as those who carry legal means of the transformative aspect of love talks? How come that the modernist toxic influence of information, double-click, has not been able to intoxicate those other sources as well? In other words, what there is in which we find ourselves again, why is it that we find ourselves again thrown into religious war, infinitely more cruel and longer lasting than those of the early modern period? And of course, in the same way as the post-Reformation wars were a product of a time and not at all a remnant of the past, the new religious wars are brand new and totally modern ones. For this, we have to turn not to a competition with information, but with politics, and that would be my third template. And I know, of course, this is an immense topic, impossible to tackle in a few minutes, but the principle of method I'm following, those of the inquiry or mode of existence, could help account for the potentialization I'm after. If the conflagration of believers unable to re-articulate their attachment to their God is so strong, it's not only because of the expansion of information as the only template acceptable everywhere, it's also because it seems to have become impossible to deploy politics as its own independent template, just as law or love as there. The disappearance of politics as its own logics and truth condition makes, of course, the assertion of beliefs the ideal shortcut to define what it is to hold values and to stick together. It is not that religion have been politicized. It is, on the contrary, that a religious state of mind, itself, as I showed before, entirely corrupted, if you want, into belief in belief, has been unable to respect this other completely original and strange sui generis mode of existence that is called politics. Compared to the certainties requested now by religious believers, politics always appear too uncertain, tentative, yes, irrational. The great irony of our time, which is a great tragedy, is that it's religious soul who are now passing judgment on politicians for being not rational enough, not certain enough, too wavering, too disposed to compromise. And contrary to lawyers and lovers, politicians seem to agree. They confess, they apologize, and they attempt at being more virtuous, principled, rational. This is especially strange to hear the Tea Party people in America accuse Mr. Obama of being irrational because he believes in climate change. From religious people believing in belief, now accusing the climate science to be a belief, and those who believe in it to be rational. I mean, that's a new situation. So the competition of values which at first pushed the religious soul into believing in belief, that is in fundamentalism, is now pushing one step further politics itself in being about belief, values, and absolute certainty. This is called value politics. What is wrongly called populism is the expansion one more time of a religion corrupted by belief in belief and now attacking politics for its lack of values. From the Tea Party to the BJP in India, from the Nigerian fight against Western learning to Holland's crumbling pillars, the idea is what political spirit lacks values and identities. Exactly what religion has lost itself in competing with information. You see the tragedy. It's information, then it made belief, then you lose religion, then believers, religious belief get into politics, then they make us lose politics. A cascade of catastrophe. That renders people mad. I mean, that's enough to really want to fight. In a way, we are back to Spinoza's Tractatus Theologico Politicus. The answer should be, say, not value politics, but value politics. And yet, it's not with Spinoza that I wish to conclude this lecture, but rather with a less well-known figure, that of Eric Voegelin, whose diagnosis of Gnosticism, although made in the 1950s, fits exactly the present situation I want to describe. Gnosticism, in Voegelin interpretation, is the extension of Christian religion into the realization of a kingdom of God. Nothing wrong with that, except in the kingdom of God in this world. In this world. And I'm slightly worried to tell that in a Lutheran church. What he calls for this reason, immanentization. This is in his book called The New Science of Politics. So it's called immanentization. Now, the key point here is that modernity is in no way understood as a break away from Christian religion. So it's completely against the notion of secularization. But as the utopian ideal of realizing the kingdom of God, now, here, for good together. Which is almost the same thing as expecting the kingdom of God. But the slight, small difference is that in one case, the traditional, it's God who does the work. In this new Gnostic one, humans take on themselves the task of God. Here. That's what he called immanentization. Secularization, thus, is Christian through and through, but a Christianity deprived of a robust, basic, essential instinct that this is not of this earth. Hence the word immanentization of transcendence, not to be confused with immanence, which is a healthy and perfectly normal sentiment. So secularization, in Voegelin's interpretation, like belief, is a highly poisonous attitude that renders the adept just as unable to respect immanence as to respect transcendence. Slightly worried that this church is going to fall down on my head, though. The psychosocial portrait of a militant drawn by Voegelin from the first Puritan all the way to the communist of his time, and that could be easily expanded to the Christian and Islamic fundamentalists of today, depends crucially on this inability to respect politics as being a mundane, immanent, extremely fragile mode of existence. So the history of political theology in the Western world depends on the articulation of three religious dimensions that Voegelin calls unabashedly truths. Yes, truths. Voegelin is not a postmodern relativist. Cosmological, anthropological, and what he called soteriological truths. The first one is really civic religion, let's say the Roman gods. The second one is the notion of cosmopolitic, the philosophy, basically the philosophical achievement. There is no anthropology in Voegelin. It's only Western. And soteriologic is Christian. The problem of political theology, according to him, is that it's never possible to hold the three together. In what he calls, very interesting term, the complication of symbolism. The complication of symbolism. So the tendency of secularization is not to abandon the Christianity, is to simplify the numbers of templates we have to judge what it is together. For instance, Augustine will be just as unable to understand the power and legitimacy of cosmological truth, the Roman gods, as Hobbes will have to understand the power and legitimacy of soteriological truth. There's a magnificent passage on Hobbes in the book. So Augustine will build a city of God without the indispensable and healthy presence of the civic gods, while the other, Hobbes, will write his Leviathan without the balancing power of salvation. I'm still commenting Voegelin. Then, secularized Gnostic will build modernity as the worst possible solution. Gods without gods. Belief and disbelief mixed up, without any one of them being able to articulate the multiplicity of template necessary to have a reasonable, not a rational, a reasonable political theology. And here's the quote, which is the commentary and the title of a symposium on which some of us are working here. Modern Gnostic civilization, says Voegelin, reverse the tendency toward differentiation. Reverse the tendency toward differentiation. I'll come back to that in my conclusion. And here I quote, "Still less can be said for obvious reason about the probable reaction of a living Christian tradition against Gnosticism, and nothing at all about the manner in which Chinese, Hindu, Islamic, and primitive civilization, this is 1950s, will react to a prolonged exposure to Gnostic devastation and repression. Only one point, at least, a reasonable surmise is possible, that is on the date of the explosion. The truth of Gnosticism is vitiated by the fallacious immanentization of the Christian eschaton. The eschatological interpretation of history results in a false picture of reality. That's where we are. We are in a false picture of reality. And errors with regard to the structure of reality have practical consequences when the false conception is made the basis of political action. Specifically, and I conclude on that, the Gnostic fallacy destroys the oldest wisdom of mankind concerning the rhythm of growth and decay that is the faith of all things under the sun. This gives you an idea of the style of Voegelin as well. So for him, the idea that we live in a time of pluralism is just ridiculous. De-differentiation is exactly what has happened. It has become almost impossible to re-articulate the multiplicity of templates, to extract religion from irrationality, and still less from belief in belief. And it's even impossible to break down the religious political amalgam around the search for values and identities. So, you see the point, in the same way as secularization has nothing to do with the abandon of religion, witness Durkheim, which is just replacing a personal God with another personal God. What is called pluralism today is the end of a plurality of templates. The end. And the sad realization that the multiplicity of clashes about belief and values is inevitable. Explosion. So, let me conclude. Religion in the singular, this is in the title of our Congress. Religion in the and pluralities of knowledge. Religion in the singular, pluralities in the plural, of knowledge in the singular. That's the title of our Congress. The singular, everyone will approve here, does not work for religion, except if it's taken as a very general phenomenon to be contrasted with knowledge. Or, except if you consider that religion, we have only one religion, like we have one mother. So the idea of having multiple religions is strange. But let's put it in the plural. To many ways in which we are made to act. So this is my definition of religion now. I mean, every talk in this conference has at some point to define religion. So this is my attempt. To many ways, so it's in the plural, to designate the many ways in which we are made to act by agencies and entities on which we have limited control and whose disappearance will make us die. I think it's a much better definition than the Durkheim one. I repeat. Ways in which we are made to act by agencies and entities on which we have limited control and whose disappearance will make us die. They come to us, we have no control, they make us act. If they are not there, finished. So in that sense, the field of religious study is wide open, as this conference shows. And economics, ecology, to name but a few domains are where we should look for added sample of what it is to be religious. I mean, there's a proliferation in this conference. Every day, every hour, I learn about a new religion. So if we keep knowledge now in the singular, we need to decide if by that we designate the epistemic search for reference or a broad multimodal term for any sort of access to reality. This is a problem I have with the title of. I suggest that knowledge as reference is best left in the singular and that the multiplicity of access to reality be given to what I call mode of existence. Only one of them is knowledge. But this is a proposition, a highly disputable one. Now, the difficulty in the title is the plurality. The big problem is with the word plurality, which, strangely enough, is in the plural. Plurality, if you have followed me, is the scarcest commodity of all. Social sciences have long attempted to entirely erase the originality of religion by the three ways I've reviewed. They claim that it was nothing, or at least nothing but society. They insisted that it was about belief, and largely succeeded in convincing adepts to be also believers. And finally, they decided that religion had been distorted, polluted, kidnapped by politics, when it is exactly the opposite movement that we are witnessing today. Politics has become impossible to articulate precisely because an inarticulable definition of religion as belief has come to the fore. So, indeed, the only solution to the coming religious war is plurality, but not of knowledge. We rather need more unity in our knowledge. But plurality of templates with which to measure the beings that are making us act and are thus holding us, be they law, love, politics, religion, or many others. What we cannot afford is to have a war of gods just at the time when we have to deal also with the war of the worlds imposed by the intrusion of the strangest goddess of all, namely Gaia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Latour, for this fascinating line of argument and a very thought-provoking lecture. I'm sure we will take a lot of these arguments and challenges into our discussion during the conference, but I'm also sure that your lecture has raised a couple of questions, and we have time to take a few questions from the floor. And I understood there are microphones. Okay. Yes. Here, here.
Thank you. Does it work? Okay. Okay, closed. I wonder if the change of religion into belief, I wonder if it is really a modern event, as you said, if I understood you well, or whether it did already start with the introduction of truth in religion at the start of monotheism. So the problems you described, are they really modern, or do they have an older source?
Well, there are many people who are more knowledgeable in this room than myself, but if I use a combination of Jan Hassmann and history of science on this question, yes, of course, Jan Hassmann's argument is that the introduction of a notion of truth into religion is a very much older event, which he gets in the old Egypt. But the fact that religion in our tradition, I mean, some of the Western tradition, which is the Christian tradition, is influenced by the question of truth and falsity, has been completely modified at the time of the scientific revolution. So here I'm basing my argument on Toulmin's book, Cosmopolis, which is a very interesting moment when he defines scientific revolution as a counter-revolution to end the religious wars, putting absolute certainty in science as the only way to stop the religious war. I mean, basically, it's Hobbes' time, basically. It's around that time. Which means that from now on, so that's, if you call modern, I would say early modern. There is a first version, early modern, which is exactly this period. Everything we tell about religion from now on will be completely under the shadow of the certainty achieved by science. And that completely modifies the truth-falsity argument of before. And then, of course, there are lots of other avatars of this question, including today, which is the one I'm most interested in the return of some of the arguments of the 16th century, when science itself is accused of being a belief. This is the example I mentioned in Tea Party. So, of course, there is a very long history, and I'm not enough knowledgeable in religious studies, so like many of my colleagues here, to make the whole set of elements going into this argument about truth and falsity from Hassmann to now. But I would follow Voegelin here, but this is a modernist, what he calls strangely a Gnostic. I mean, he used Gnosticism in a strange way, Gnostic argument. Before, the notion of truth and falsity in religion was there, but it didn't have a toxic element which I try to recognize here as convincing those who are acted upon by the divinities to believe in belief. I mean, this is what Islamic scholars always recognize, the enormous difference between, let's say, what it was to be Islamic before the modernization of reformation of Islamic, which become fundamentalism. I mean, fundamentalism is a modernist view. And so there are many layers which I should be able to unpack to answer your question. But I think this is the gist. It is a modernist. At least the poison is modern.
Thank you. Other question?
Hello, Jean-François Auger from the University of Groningen. In your example of religion, you took mostly a Christian, Roman Christian example, but could we extend some of your claims to other religions, such as Judaism? And my point here is in Christianism, truth is mostly transcendental, while in Judaism it's mostly consensual, what everybody believes in. Could you comment on this?
I think your argument is good enough. It's very embarrassing to be in the church, the Lutheran church, talk about everything. Yeah. This is Spinoza's argument, of course, is that the great virtue of Judaism is to have solved the political, theological question completely differently. So you're right that there is something, but in the Virginian argument it says that you need the three sort of compacted truths together to be able to resist the danger of every one of his three gods. So if you lose the civic gods, if you lose the cosmopolitical God, and if you lose the soteriological God, you lose something which will never be repaired. And his argument is that Christianity, and maybe Christianity, you're right, had been more sensitive to this poison than Judaism, but here I'm working on things which I'm much too ignorant of. But his argument I understand well, and it's a very important argument. Christianity was highly sensitive to the immanentization of transcendence, which is not at all the same thing than a sound respect for immanence. Because immanentization of transcendence means, as Virgilin says, that we are going to lose the authenticity of access to reality. Because we'll never know when we take on our shoulders the act of being God on earth, the kingdom of God on earth, if we are not, whom are we obeying? And so he follows, which is very strange. The book is very strange, and it's 1950, it's a bit outdated, but it's very interesting. He follows the transformation of it, the Gnostic, from Joachim the Floor all the way to the Stalinist of his days. And every time one new layers of militant believes that they are secularized, that they have abandoned Christianity, and every time they realize in a more utopian, dangerous way the Gnostic dream of bringing the kingdom on earth. So it's of course there's a very lots of other religions are probably immunized against that poison. So we should be able, like Sloterdijk says, to study the religion as a problem of immunity. But certainly in our tradition, we have not been immunized. So belief, the great advantage of Judaism is that there is no belief, if this is what you said. And that's a great danger. Christians are highly sensitive to the notion of belief. So they are very easily contaminated by, oh yes, we believe. And we believe in things which are even more extraordinary than the one you access to. We access the supernatural. And you science, you just access the natural. And I've shown many times exactly the opposite. Yes, there are people who are more sensitive to toxicity. I think that's the answer. One possible answer. It's a very important question.
Is there another question? Is this working? Christoph.
Thanks a lot. Christoph Baumgartner, Utrecht University. I noticed you composed your lecture in the sense that at the very beginning and at the end you alluded to something that you addressed in a piece on Anthropocene, namely climate change and things like that. And do you think that there is a sort of relation between the things that you explicitly addressed, as it were, namely this power of religion, and the other motive that was more present between the lines, as it were, things that are related to the new ideas about the planet and the destruction of the planet and things like that?
Yes, I didn't speak about the thing which is most important for me, of course, which is what do we do with Gaia? But there are lots of people working on that here. My argument is that if we want to avoid treating Gaia as a goddess, if we want to avoid the usual argument, is it pagan or not pagan, is it scientific or not scientific, etc., we have to get the notion of belief out of the way. And also the notion of social explanation of religion, which is my usual enemy. I mean, this is a long fight against social explanation of anything, science, religion. So I would answer you saying, I mean, I'm working a lot on Gaia. I gave lectures in Edinburgh on that topic, but this is a sort of preliminary step. Belief renders inauthentic the connection, the way people like me, interrogated on what do we believe in, don't know what to answer. And if I say I don't believe in anything, even though I'm a practicing Catholic, it's ununderstandable. I mean, you believe or you don't believe? My son, my daughter asked me this question. I said, no, this is not a question of belief. And they don't believe it's not a question of belief. I wrote a whole book on that, rejoicing. Precisely, they don't believe. No, you have to believe. So we have lost the possibility of not believing in belief. So we are unable to articulate the connection with the beings of salvation. They are important, but they are not hegemonic. I want also to be able to talk about the beings of law, and of technology, and of science. That's what I call pluralism. And it seemed to me that this work is necessary before we are able to meet this strange beast, highly sensitive beast, goddess, science, strange animal, terrible sovereign that is called Gaia. So a lot of work has to be done, so to speak, before we are worth meeting Gaia, if I can say that. If we meet her, or it, or he, or whatever, or they, with the equipment we have to talk about religion as belief, she, he, it, they, will wipe us. This is a somewhat grandiose argument to your question, answer to your question. But yes, the question is, of course, Gaia. That's what makes the whole earth tremble. And everyone might be thinking again.
There's time for one more question, I think. Yes.
You were speaking about politics.
I don't hear you.
That you were speaking about politics and about the plurality of templates as something what is actually what is necessary at the moment. And now also about doing away with believing in belief. Then my question would be whether you can, or how do you imagine how such task, which you are in some way presenting, how such task can be practically enacted through democratic political negotiation, or how to say it? how can it be put into practice?
Well, this is an entirely different line of talk, which is the one on politics of nature, which I alluded only for one part, which is, it's a bit like the question before. If politics is about values and identity, politics is impossible. So if we morph politics, which is a very important mode of existence, I spent a lot of time in the inquiry trying to define it, and if we morph it into ersatz of religion, that is, religion is kidnapping politics, and what is called value politics, which unfortunately is visible about everywhere in the world, even in Holland, politics is impossible. Because then it will be value and identity against one another. And since my argument is that those are built around the notion of belief, which are not re-articulable, because they are inauthentic, using Vogelian argument, then it's only fight. We are exactly back to the religious war out of which the notion of science and the notion of modernism was extracted. So I didn't talk at all. I mean, I'm very interested in the topic, and I worked a lot on that topic, but it was not my topic tonight. Only a sort of precaution. In the same way as religion may disappear as a template to account for how we are connected to our beings, politics may disappear as well. So you might ask yourself the question, when is the last time you had a political discussion with people you disagree with? I mean, ask yourself, it would be an interesting thing. When is the last time? I'm not asking you the last time you made love. I'm asking you the last time you really engaged in a reasonable way, in the sense I define, with people who don't believe at all. Maybe years, months, days, decades. I let you judge.
Thanks a lot. I think that is a very good ending of this evening, and it leaves us with many questions.